All right, welcome to Are We There Yet from Crypto Sapiens. I'm your host, Chris Eberle. Today I'm joined by Alan from Quai, and we are on location. Where are we, Alan?
We're here in Austin, Texas at the Quai office. Glad for you to join us here, Chris, and excited to dive in.
Excited to be here. It worked out serendipitously that I'm in town to move in my daughter Victoria to UT, where she starts as a freshman. We move her in tomorrow. We'll talk a bit about UT in this conversation, which we're very close to campus right now.
Yeah, we've been getting a ton of people influx to Austin, and so that's kind of the thing of making sure that everyone here is welcome and that the Southern hospitality treats you well, and that this great city can continue innovation and bring like-minded people in the crypto space. And it's been a great hub for it, and we're glad to be a part of it.
I love it, man. I love it here. I always enjoyed coming to Austin. Previously, I had come primarily for work. I have some family here that I'd visited as well, but most recently in the context of looking at schools for my daughter and then visiting and orientation and all of that, I just found Austin just to be a really special place. So thank you for being part of my trip back.
Yeah. I mean, originally we got a lot of the COVID influx. And so the people that moved from San Francisco, New York, and now it's steadied out. And so you think after that, it's more been of a equal pace of people that are coming for tech and coming for different pieces. And we've kind of stabilized versus before, kind of in 2020, when it was more of a madhouse and a rush to get to Austin. But it's cool to see the demographics change, and it's cool to see the city evolve and bring in all the different ideas.
Amazing. Yeah. So we're fortunate to have a number of the folks that tune into Crypto Sapiens and tune into Are We There Yet? In particular, we get sort of a mix of people, some work in crypto and Web3 all day, every day, and are super in it and know all the things. Other folks are more, curious about emerging technology, maybe have some awareness, or more coming at it from the, sort of interesting business, interesting tech perspective. So sort of with that as a setup, knowing that that's your audience, I wonder if you could just give folks first just a sense of, who you are, your background, how you got to be, working in this space.
Yeah. So my background, I've always kind of been a programmer. In high school, I was tinkering with technology, learning to code, was able to dive in. And I think gaming really brought me into that, and trying to figure out ways to, just hack something or toy with different types of technology. And that led me to really go down the rabbit hole of computer science. And so I think first and foremost, as someone that is in the realm of blockchain engineering and protocol design, that is the rabbit hole I fell down whenever I first discovered Bitcoin and Ethereum, is really trying to figure out what ways these technologies could be used and how they worked. Eventually, of course, with UT and Austin being a lot of this conversation, that's where I went to school, and I did my undergrad there in computer science. And I was really kind of a lone person in the discovery and efforts of Bitcoin. There were some conversations and forums on the computer science Facebook of, like, in 2013, people talking about Bitcoin and being like, oh, it's nothing. And at that point, going into college in 2016, 2017, really, it was pretty empty in terms of people that were interested in crypto. And that allowed me to go back between a few internships and continued research that I had from this first kind of leaping off point for my interest in crypto to really able to create a foundation. So was able to start a club at UT, started the Texas Blockchain Organization, was the founding president of that, grew that to 200 students. The sort of participation ebbed and flowed with the markets, but I think we did a good job educating and building out that cohesive group. And after that, continued with several other internships in the realm of computer science and programming, as well as research as part of Texas Blockchain. Eventually, that led to my graduation in 2020. I worked at Apple as a software engineer here in Austin as well, was in the supply chain side of the world, working on North and South American supply chains and looking at different kind of product flows there. And then got the itch to get back into crypto, picked up a lot of the research we did at UT and turned that into Quai Network. And so glad to share more on Quai Network kind of in depth, but that's kind of my journey on how we got to this point. A lot of different sort of serendipitous connections between people that were part of the Texas Blockchain group, as well as professors that helped educate the students as well, and then really trying to create that nexus of people interested in crypto.
Amazing. So much goodness, I think, in there. I think one of the things that stands out to me is, I mean, you've been in crypto, so to speak, for a long time.
Yeah, it feels like a short time, but it's been a little while, since about 2016, 2015, 2016. I mean, Bitcoin was probably about $300 at the time. And
Yeah.
I didn't really understand the full ramifications and implications. I was like, this is just cool tech, but I wasn't super versed on how this is going to impact the dollar and global markets and all of those things. I was just like, this is cool technology. And I want to try it out kind of in a similar fashion to just experimenting with new code or experimenting in new types of ways to plug into a video game or plug into something to pay somebody. So that was kind of where my mind was at. And just to see it evolve over time and then actually kind of mark those milestones of the progression and see it sort of fundamentally. I don't think crypto's made a ton of progress since even those times. And Bitcoin itself hasn't really changed much outside of SegWit and a few other minor upgrades. But when kind of looping back into the theme of Are We There Yet? I think we're going to have some really interesting discussions on where the landscape is today. And yeah, I mean, it feels shorter than it's been.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, and I've been in the industry or the space, whatever we call it, a similar amount of time, and I have to agree for all that's happened, all the ups and downs are sort of we are still so early. Well, cool. So yeah, let's get into why Quai, and again remembering that we've got some folks tuning in that are noobs or normies or whatever we want to call them. Like, I wonder if you can give sort of starting with like a layperson's kind of description. What this is, where it came from, and why it's what's getting the primary focus of your time.
Yeah. So for Quai Network, it's essentially a blockchain that is supposed to be faster and cheaper than something like Bitcoin, but also programmable to something like Ethereum. And we want to maintain the properties of Bitcoin and the things that really attract people into crypto. So decentralization, censorship resistance, sort of removing the ability for someone to influence a system. And I think a lot of the goal and the ethos is to maintain a lot of those original values. And the journey that we got here is, I'm not the inventor of the technical protocol. I've helped assist with the team, and I've actually taken part of some of the research, but Dr. Carl Creeder, who's one of our other co-founders, is sort of the main gigabrain behind the project. And as a student at the time at UT Austin, he completed his PhD earlier on, and he was actually a colleague to my professor, Sriram Vishwanath. And so Sriram was our main advisor for the club, and he helped sort of say, hey, Carl, I've got some students kind of who want to work on some cool things. They're cheap labor. Feel free to throw them at your research project.
Nice.
And that's kind of what we did. Nights and weekends outside of classes, we were in the lab working on how to scale blockchain technology with this new idea. And at the time, it was called block reduce. And this concept of block reduce, from a very similar database sort of design in which you make a database faster by dividing it up into many different partitions, or on quote unquote sharding, we would say, let's apply sharding to a blockchain to make it faster and have the same properties of something like Bitcoin. So we want to take Bitcoin's slowness, get rid of it, but make sure we're just as decentralized and robust as Bitcoin. And if you look at Bitcoin today, you have a lot of maximalism around and tribalism around Bitcoin due to its properties and its emergence. But we sort of challenge that. We'll say, well, let's start from a fresh approach and see what we can do and innovate. And there's many valid reasons on why a new beginning is sort of needed in this blockchain technology, because it's very hard to change when it's live. And so I think that does break up a lot of tribalism, and it does bring in a lot of harsh feelings depending on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to establish and almost sort of go against the grain on the existing philosophy or the existing topology and designs. But with Quai, we were like, all right, if we had to put all of that aside and start from something new, how do we design this to achieve that original goal? And that's how we've landed on building out Quai, is we have this idea of taking a blockchain, dividing it into many different shards, combining that through a property called merged mining. So these shards are interwoven together, and we use the properties of proof of work in order to achieve this. Fundamentally, we've taken proof of work as the approach as well, because we see it as a more objective and actually usable form for achieving scale. And so the properties of that objectivity, given we're taking that real energy, that real properties from the world, as opposed to subjectivity in regards to proof of stake, gives us better forms of scaling and allows us to get better security when applying merge mining to sharding. And that journey sort of led us through 2018 into sort of 2020 and then into 2022 with the first fundraise that we did. So we're a venture-backed company backed by Polychain Capital, Alumni Ventures, and several others. And that's kind of allowed us to explore these ideas, harden the system, and get us to the point today. And Team is about 20 people. We're here as I said, and this sort of evolution of this design and philosophy is really trying to create the system that accomplishes what we're trying to do with blockchain as a whole.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Something that stood out to me when I toured UT with my family, and that is in the back of my head, sort of as you're talking, is there's a thing that they say at UT, which is what starts here changes the world. And I have to think, it's not a coincidence that we see so many, university blockchain clubs, so many, students, younger folks, things like that, people from the university context sort of coming and getting excited about technology that actually has the potential to change the world within our lifetimes. And I wonder, I want to go deeper into some of the Quai-centric stuff, but I also wonder if maybe you could talk a little bit more about the university connection. I know you mentioned when I came into your office here, you've got sort of an incubator kind of space set up, and you have students coming through. And how does that all sort of tie together? You're close to UT, sort of in physicality, but also it feels like the ties remain tight.
Yeah, I think when you put a lot of really smart people in a similar place and you give them the tools and the ability, it's almost like a pressure cooker, and good ideas pop out. And the ability to experiment and rapidly innovate is a lot of the ideas that go into being on campus and just being around people, and really allowing these things to sort of emerge organically depending on the vertical that you're working in, whether it is blockchain, AI, biology, chemistry, math, or even art and literature. And so I think a lot of the benefits from UT is actually being in Austin, which is a sort of crypto hub as well as a technology hub. There's a lot of great companies that have been here and established. And I think a lot of people are surprised when you look at the history of Austin in terms of the companies that have been built, the almost quote unquote Silicon Hills that it's been deemed before, and the just great legacy that it has in terms of entrepreneurs and technology, AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, Apple, and many more. And that, I think, sort of brings in a lot of entrepreneurs to sort of focus on the practical piece as opposed to just theory, and the practical application of people starting a business, really getting educated and knowing how to run an operation versus just opining from an ivory tower on what needs to be, beneficial for the world. And I think that's where a lot of grit and tenacity comes out of it too. And if you look at that kind of underdog story that UT has been classically in sports too, I think that's applied from people in the business setting. And I think, like I said, with the incubator here, we want to give people the tools and the skill set and the ability to just, bump shoulders and rub elbows with people that are interested in similar ideas, and hopefully something can come out of that. And I think we're starting to see that grow as well. And I think especially within UT, that offers a lot of great resources, and we've always tried to foster that culture.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, find the next kid that can take the path that you took to be sitting here now. Yeah,
hopefully so. And I mean, we want to continue to lend that on. I know we just had a student that was working out of here that was working on an AI startup, and he's working on different ways to, either stay here in Austin, make it happen, or go to San Francisco, get more funding. And just seeing those success stories and seeing people continually shape what's happening today and with the real sort of impact that they can make is super important.
So one of the things that you mentioned about sort of, a really good reason for there to be a fresh start, a new chains, these kind of things, is because, like you said, it's really hard to change them once they're live by design. Sort of the blessing and the curse of this tech. And one of the things that actually, when I first conceived of Are We There Yet as a podcast, and was drafting on sort of topics, one of them was, do we have enough blockchains? Do we have enough L2s? Do we have enough L3s? And spoiler alert, I don't think that we do. And I actually think, as we progress, more and more people will not think of them as these sort of distinct, separate tribes of things. So, we're probably on the same side of this from a argument perspective. But I wonder if you could take folks through, with that lens, for people from the outside, there are so many of these things, and there's Arbitrum and Base and Solana, and why are you making a new one? There's L3s. There's I get a kick out of the I don't know if you know the Sanko guys or Sonko guys. They're launched a Arbitrum L3, but I love the irreverence of their products and their posts and things. But I think it's a great example actually of a whole bunch of use cases for these things. But anyways,
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, like the all these different chains and how folks should think about
Absolutely.
it.
And so if you look at really the decision on chains, it's a trade-off space of what you're trying to accomplish in the use case. And for Senko's case, I think launching an L3 and then having a very specific app that wants to deploy and interact with this chain is very practical and is implemented in a proper way because they get kind of full control and scope of what they want that ecosystem to look like. But if you look at something that's closer to the base layer, like what we're doing with Quai, we want it to be more ubiquitous in general. And I think we're still in the design sort of scenarios of what we want a general layer to look like. And you can make trade-offs like Solana does, in which you have a more close-knit, I won't say fully centralized because they do have a robust validator set, but there are different sort of compromises that you make in terms of hardware versus a Bitcoin that is very rudimentary and I can run on a Raspberry Pi and pair that with other sorts of scaling technology on top of it. It becomes sort of frictioned and more ad hoc compared to, again, a more integrated approach like a Solana does. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out now is what is the acceptable design space for consumer hardware? What do we want people to run this software on? Who needs to run it? Do we need 100,000 nodes or are we okay with 500? And do we need to have certain specifications in terms of RAM or storage? Or do we really just say, we'll kind of let the markets decide and whatever people come and contribute in terms of security, that's okay as well. So I still think it's very early in terms of the winner. And I don't know if really the solutions have ossified in a way that we've perceived them as, sole category winner take all in this scenario. I do think a Pareto principle applies in which the vast majority of the systems or the value will accrue on a smaller set of systems. And Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana sort of represent that today. And they accrue most of the TVL, they take most of the transactions, and the smaller, more ad hoc layer 2s and layer 3s are more sort of application specific. So within those systems that take in most of that volume and the market share, they still haven't really ossified in a way that's continually usable. So that forces more value to go and get accrued in layer 2s and layer 3s. And I still think we're in a very challenging situation in which these layer 2s are sort of taking market share away from Ethereum and they're dragging the design space away from making sure the layer 1 can be as fast and as seamless as possible, which is what we're trying to do with Quai. And you look at, again, the ossification of these systems, you really kind of limit yourself in terms of how you can build on top of them. Bitcoin in its nature being scripting and UTXO based can really only function with Lightning and Taproot assets and other ways that work with the UTXO design land. Same with the EVM on Ethereum. That starting decision, it's very hard to change after the fact. And if you wanted to move to something like a Solana or an SVM and having that different way of operating in terms of parallelization, that takes a sort of new approach. And that's kind of what they're doing with newer systems like Monad or people on layer 2s like Mega ETH. And so I think right now, specifically when talking about Ethereum, it's kind of in a catch-22 in which does it want to be more of that general DA and data availability layer in which layer 2s can flourish, or do we need to do further optimization? And for Quai, we step back and we look at, well, here are the myriad of problems that exist in all of these ecosystems. How can we sort of pick and choose what we want to do? And I think due to the ossification, that gives us a really unique last mover's advantage. And that kind of purposely shows up in a lot of our roadmap and implementation when people are like, well, you guys haven't launched it. What are you doing? And it's like, well, we're really trying to make sure we pull in the right pieces, and we want to do it intentfully, and we want to make sure that the way that we've designed the topology of Quai can sort of outmaneuver when we get to market all of these other things that are a bit slower.
I say, and when you and I first met, you mentioned the last mover's advantage, and I dig it. I think so many times, not just in this space, I think in tech in general, you see people who have built a beautiful hammer and then go in search of nails to hammer in with it, and you're building it with a mind for the kinds of nails that are out there, and those are those that are coming. And to that end, you guys have just had a big release, right? A big milestone. You want to take folks through what that looks like?
So we recently announced our developer network that is mainnet compatible, and the big sort of piece with that is that if developers go and deploy today, they pick up our SDKs and they use our RPC infrastructure, interact with the block explorers, download wallets. All of that infrastructure will remain compatible and make a seamless transition for when we do get to mainnet. And that really allows us to push developers and ecosystem integrations and partners to start today. And it's not, let's wait for everything to be live. There's a token that's trading, but all of your things that you want to get built, whether it's an NFT marketplace, a wallet, a payment application, you can get started and ensure that that is a smooth process for your users. And we're seeing a lot of our prior testnet applications already moving over. And we have a lot of other partners that are integrating today and really getting started. And it's been great. It's been a bit of a wave of people that are asking questions and diving in, but really working through the bugs and the issues as they arise has been a huge priority of ours.
Cool. I think one of the things that, like, when I talk to folks who are, maybe adjacent to Web3, and so they've heard of the things, and they get that it's more than a casino and all of that, but but are sort of arm's length, is if you think of them in terms of consumers, if these are end consumers, like so much of what happens, I think in the area where you're building, you're courting developers. It's more of a B2B or business to builder kind of structure at this point in time, versus like the end user thinking like, oh, I want to go, I want to be transacting on Quai every day. And I don't know, I bring this up because I feel like when, in trying to help folks sort of understand how this all fits together, it's like, oh, well, this is core infrastructure that makes it so that in this case, so we can, so crypto can be just easily and naturally and transparently sort of just used every day. And I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit. Like we talked about that when you and I first met as well. This I think simple but really important goal of crypto being used every day.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, when you look at the purpose of crypto and why it was designed, is to really remove centralized actors from money, separating money from state, creating this thing that is competitive to the dollar, if not supporting the dollar more recently, when you look at politicians wanting to use it in that light.
Yeah.
And for the premise of crypto to grow, it needs integrations and it needs people that are willing to accept it and broadly consider it as that base and as this thing that is transactionally usable and is foundational to our economy. Bitcoin is probably the leader in that. And in the use of Bitcoin pursuing that, we're starting to see nations accept it. We're starting to see banks accept it. We're seeing ETFs, and we're seeing these ways that it is becoming more accessible and more easily usable. And although an ETF isn't necessarily interacting on chain, it is still more trusted than something like a centralized exchange, given the sort of legality and premises around custody there. But for Quai and starting out, we want to abstract that crypto experience. And we want to see if you're paying with something and you're using just a wallet application, or you're using something that looks closer to Venmo, maybe it is using crypto underneath the hood, and we've scaled it such that you're not really paying attention to that. And whether you're using something like a stable coin on Quai or something that's more native to the system that represents stability. And we're experimenting in many different economic designs there, as well as the applications that are required to do so. And fundamentally, I think what constrains a lot of the crypto experience, and when you talk about having a hammer and looking for nails, it's really something that makes it, that addresses the core blocking principles of payments today. And I think addressing crypto payments is huge, and I believe it's fundamentally overlooked. If you look at systems like Venmo, PayPal, Apple Pay, and others, all of these have restrictions, and they have constraints around who can access it in terms of having a driver's license or a certain amount of rent or payment that is verified. And across the globe, I think the first way that people can get into these global systems is just get a crypto wallet. And if we had ways that makes it super easy for me to send crypto across the globe based off of a ID or someone that wants to do remittances, or an easy way to look up a phone number, I think that would be a killer use case. And there are a ton of people that are doing it, but I still think people are thinking about it from a crypto mind versus a user mind. And that is sort of the next evolution that we're looking to interweave, not only within an application specific interface, but from the network itself that enables those rails to have things that can transact permissionlessly across the globe. And I think the most immediate jump to get there will be through stablecoins and the growth of stablecoins. I think that's been a huge area that is overlooked in regards to payments, considering the adoption that has occurred today for crypto and just getting people that are unbanked, traditionally banked and accessible for this network. And then beyond that, I think we can move into kind of more speculative use cases and things that are enabling application and finance in a decentralized way on top of just the payments use case. But ideally on Quai Network, we enable it all, being generalized and ubiquitous, but also scalable and global.
Nice. Yeah. That really resonates. I think in particular, thinking about it from a user perspective, from a customer perspective, not from a crypto perspective. And I think that's something that, we as a space, as an industry, even for as large and fragmented and sometimes tribal and weird as crypto is, we all need to kind of embrace the fact that we've leaned too heavily into like, come do crypto things, come deal with the friction, come, figure out how to put MetaMask on your browser and it's okay. Private keys are fine. You need to just write your seed phrase down. Yeah. Right, Eureka, John, don't forget your seed phrase. Sorry, I just broke the fourth wall. But
there's some degree in which you do actually want people to have that burden. And I think that's also why it's so interesting for a lot of the younger people that do kind of grow up in this era of like being terminally online almost and being familiar. It's like, okay, I know this is a important piece of information that I need secret versus like someone owning my information and having that I know I can go and say, well, I need my password changed. And I think that's still a gap, whether old or young, that if you're able to kind of get across that barrier, crypto really clicks. And it's like, that is the power of what crypto does. And when I talk about earlier of, separating state and money, well, that is like you own that information. And I think that concept of ownership has really been sort of permutated. And it's like, well, now we need to own everything. And you get to the point of like, decentralized Uber. And sure, like you can go down that rabbit hole, but fundamentally, we're here to solve that first sort of seed, grow that and be like owning that asset and money is like the clear winner of use cases.
I like that a lot. I think it makes me think of Chris Dixon's read, write, own, which I have used to I don't know, bridge the gap maybe with friends who are unfamiliar or more likely like skeptical about crypto because of the things that they've seen and
I have a signed version of his book, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, I was able to chat with him at South by Southwest and
amazing.
Went to his book signing. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, I think he's long before the book. I think his A16Z crypto podcast are things that I sent to people to feed curiosities and all of that. But okay, cool. I wanted to go sort of a zooming out and then zooming in.
Sure.
I want to go like one more click into this sort of, there's people talk about like Web 2.5, right? And like Fred Wilson has in Web3 investments that he's supported where people do a great job of just being customer focused. And like you talk about like leading with what's there for the user, and the crypto components are they're just working underneath, right? And some people call it Web 2.5 because it which I think it's a misnomer in a way because it feels like, it's a step backwards. But really, I think it's more about sort of meeting people where they are, right? And actually, again, to your point, like leaning into building for users and these kinds of things. And I wonder, like, I guess one, like, how do you feel about sort of that whole space or that label? Is there a better label? And then the sort of the second piece is when you're talking to builders, and trying to engage the right kinds of folks to come build on Quai and for you to support, like, what do those conversations look like? What do you look for? What are people looking for? These kind of things.
Yeah. So Web 2.5, I think, concept aside and like framing aside, we need to kind of even get back more to Web 2. And I don't know in saying that if Web 3 was a mistake, but I definitely think it got over popularized, and I think it caught a lot of attention and put a lot of ideals in place that may not be the exact focus of the technology. If you look at, again, whenever I said of starting from that seed and then going out and ending up at places like decentralized Uber, I think Web3 sort of led us down that rabbit hole where it promised the world and delivered very little. And when you give that concept of going back and saying, well, let's rethink these apps, let's get closer to like a Web 2.5, or I think there's even like a lot of other, rephrases of Web X, and the builders ultimately need to use these primitives in a way that does address the user concerns. So I think we're going to see a lot of social authentication and a lot of reframed wallet experiences, such as account abstraction. So can I use a Gmail account in order to get a phrase? And then is that stored somewhere else for me? And then is there a trusted way or a trust minimized way that I know I'm still getting that similar refresh password experience, but crypto is under the hood? And I think for more de minimis amounts and a more kind of lower touch, sort of experience in which people can not have a ton of money in that, and they're kind of interested in just experimenting with it. And then it gets to a point where it's like, hey, you're kind of above a threshold. Maybe you should back up a seed phrase and move this and get it in a more trusted way that is either cold storage or in a different wallet. I think that would be kind of the preferred thing, and just allowing people to experiment, because I think it's always super refreshing where I go to an application and then I'm experimenting, trying out the software, and then it's like, oh, I didn't even realize it made a wallet for me. And then whenever I get to a certain amount where it matters, I can back it up. So I think just certain design philosophies like that allow us to get closer to like a Web 2.5. Mm-hmm. And then they also, going back to your question on the builder perspective of what they need in the infrastructure, from our team, we want to get as much infrastructure off of our plate. We want to run a blockchain. That's what we're experts in. And we don't want to trust as much in terms of explorers, RPCs, wallets that rely on those explorers and RPCs, and all these kind of dependencies that are really creating a lot of friction and centralization. Looking at the Ethereum ecosystem in particular and others that rely on block explorers, I know it's tough because you're looking at the sort of technical data that's required to interact with the network from these centralized providers. So to our builders, we always say, how can we really take that off of your plate as well? Because should builders be hosting their own website, or can they use something like IPFS? And can they further decentralize those systems? I know Uniswap hosts all their data on IPFS. So I think creating more of those things that from a wallet and security standpoint can kind of remove friction there, but then also from a hosting and infrastructure side, create more of a decentralized approach in which really the technologies and access to the network remains censorship resistant, but the way that you're doing it is super easy. And from a user standpoint, you're getting the most sort of bang for your buck there in terms of interacting with these decentralized networks.
Totally. So staying on the builder track for a sec, what should builders know about Quai? How should they get in touch? Who are you talking to these days? These kinds of things. What's the call to action for builders out there?
So fundamentally with Quai, we're an EVM compatible blockchain. So we have some slight modifications, but we're really trying to bring people that are familiar with the EVM. We also want to bring people that want to develop on a fast, low-fee blockchain and really just try to create also this emerging area of the compute economy. We see the ability for narratives like DePIN or decentralized physical infrastructure to be paired with things like decentralized wireless and other ways that we're bringing in these real world applications onto a blockchain and making them more permissionless. And then fundamentally too, I'm kind of counteracting myself with some of my prior statements, but we see these applications as useful and we want to enable them on the scalable blockchain. And we have some unique primitives in the system. So we have something called a crypto energy dollar that we're working on from an economic standpoint. We utilize the properties of proof of work and we oracleize it to create a stablecoin alternative. So something that is competitive to USDC, USDT, given it is more crypto native to the protocol. And we'd love for people to experiment with ways to utilize this technology. And so having that being utilized for payments and having that being something that people can use to either arbitrage between markets as well as sort of counteract with the mining properties that exist within Quai. And so we see a bright future for that, and we want that to be adopted more globally. And then on top of that, with the properties of just the ecosystem, so some of the basics that allow for better custody of Quai and better custody of the assets on the network, as well as sort of more institutional or more finance-based plugins.
Cool. How do folks learn more? How do they get in touch?
Yeah, so qu.ai is our handle and our website. On Twitter, we're at Quai Network. Our Discord is a great place to hang out. I'm frequently in the Discord, glad to answer questions there. And all of our links for this dev release have been published on our blog, and they're live and available for people to start building today.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll include links to all of that in show notes.
Fantastic.
And we get this stuff, shared out on social. As we wind down, I think we've already gotten, I think, a taste of this for some of the things that you've said. But where do you think this is all headed? Like, what does this look like in even just a couple of years?
Yeah. So, we're kind of in this still forming pool of ideas and evolution of technology. And I think we're still going to see very little change in the next 10 years. As we've sort of looked at since 2015, a lot of the dominant currencies will remain. And ideally, it gets kind of more of a refreshing facelift from a market perspective. And I think that's really what people are excited about. And that will enable builders, because this crypto space is still super small, like relative to all the other assets that are out there and the markets that are influenced by just kind of standard technology. If you look at NVIDIA, I think, we're still half the size of NVIDIA almost. And so the technology to evolve and get to a point where people can experiment more freely, and then also bring in a lot of these different ideas that are on the sort of cusp of innovation. So I think Ethereum is still going to change a lot. They're bringing a lot of ideas, and I think that it's going to move and shake for a lot of different protocols. But ideally, I think that holy grail is still crypto payments and getting people to utilize it every day, being able to pay with it, being able to use these trustless rails, whether it's on Quai or on other blockchains that are equally or potentially more performant. But I think Quai will be the most performant one, and doing that in a way that anyone can access at the touch of their fingertips.
Amazing. And what do you think about the? I saw the stories about Apple and the seemingly like closer than we thought path to being able to sort of tap to pay with crypto.
Yeah, and I think if you look at we're in the app design space, so we see that with some of the people that are building on Quai for those types of applications. Android was always kind of the first mover there because you can experiment, it's more open, and then every time we asked some of the people building, it's like, well, when can we tap to pay with Apple? They're like, it's going to come, but we don't know. It's kind of a walled garden. And I think looking at that ecosystem, they have full control. And crypto was built to remove some of that, but we still want access to those areas that can allow us to improve it. Because maybe instead of having to have all this friction with seed phrases and others, well, we can rely on secure enclaves and other ways that can give us that tap to pay like experience with the hardware that we all have, because I know they have huge vendor lock-in and a monopoly over the phone category. So for that to enable builders and give them that into tap to pay, I think is huge. And I think it will be, a huge improvement for the ability for people to actually adopt crypto for that specific category that I'm excited about.
Cool. Yeah. And it's centralized and a little.
Well, I mean, ideally, everything going through it is decentralized, and you're just sending messages. And so, that's that's kind of like the limit, and the thing that Apple looks at is like, well, is there going to be a barrier on that? I know they gated and they removed applications from the App Store from having NFTs and having different things that would qualify as payments and micropayments that had to get processed. And if you're buying a $5,000 NFT, well, you don't want to pay Apple 30% on that. So the question around how they're going to police it, I think, is still open. But if it's true and that's a real use case that will come through, I think that's huge and it'll be a big unlock. If not, maybe you'll have to have a backup Android for tap to pay.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, no, I think it's I'm with you. I think it's an exciting development for sure, and we'll see sort of see where it goes. All right. Any closing thoughts? Anything you wanted to get into that we didn't? Anything you want folks to anything you want to leave behind with folks?
No, Chris, I think this was a great interview. The topics that I think we covered are pretty extensive. We didn't get much into like the technology pieces, but just want to reemphasize that what we're doing is from a ground up approach, and it's interesting to see the team and then the hard work that it's taken to get to this point. I definitely want to congratulate them and make sure that that's at the forefront of sort of looking at how to build companies and how to help people become part of this mission and really see what Quai is going to do in the future. And I think we have a lot to look forward to later on in the year. We're going to keep ramping up for mainnet, and hopefully by the end of this year, we can get there with this big dev release. We're going to continue to push and get our next big testnet out next month. Cool. And then following the success of that testnet, launch mainnet. So really that's what's on our horizon. And then as we begin to onboard these partners, whether that's with bridges, exchanges, as well as more wallets, and really create this flourishing ecosystem of people that are excited to build on Quai Network, I think that's super huge for the project.
Awesome. Yeah, no, pleasure to meet you. Thank you for hosting me in person. And I feel like I've already got ideas in my head for a follow-up episode as things go. We can get a little bit deeper into the tech and follow along on the path to mainnet. So
That'd be fantastic. Well, appreciate you joining us here in person, and maybe there will be a follow-up soon.
right on. All right. And what starts here changes the world. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. All right, Alan.
Let's ride.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. This was great.
Pleasure, man.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
this was good.
All right.